Hello and welcome to the Overland Journal podcast. I'm your host, Scott Brady, and for this week's guest, we have Scott Brady's dad. So please enjoy my conversation with Larry Brady, where I interview him about his life and the things that brought him up to the point that I became more than a glimmer in him and my mom's eye. The stories of his time in the Air Force, traveling to Thailand, his time as a sportsman, hunting throughout the desert Southwest and southwestern United States with him and his father, and ultimately me coming along the way, sometimes with my Red Ryder BB gun. But we have a great conversation about how he got involved with the outdoors and then how he taught me so many of those things that ultimately resulted in my interest and passion for travel. We also talk about my dad and my trip to Australia and some other adventures that we've done in the southwestern United States. So please enjoy my conversation with my dad, Larry Brady. Well, Dad, thank you so much for being on the podcast. We have Mr. Larry Brady with us. So literally the podcast would not exist without you. Overland Journal magazine wouldn't exist without you. So, boy, it's such an honor to have you on this podcast with me. And, you know, what I wanted to really talk about was all of the experiences that you've had in your life that helped shape my life, and just the privilege that I had as your son to be able to experience the outdoors and to experience a passion for discovering new things, and all the support that I got from Mom and you in my travels. So I thought it would be really fun to have this conversation with you today. But I think we should start off by talking about what you learned from your dad. So I called him Papo, but Donald was your dad, my grandfather, and he was a firefighter. But where did you guys go outdoors? What kind of activities did you do, and what did you learn from your dad?
Probably our first outdoor adventures were when we went to the High Sierras fishing.
Sure.
With two other families from firemen. Yeah. And that was 70 years ago.
Sure.
And we're still very close friends, and the boys, and because unfortunately all the dads have passed away. Yeah. And we still go up to Mammoth in California fishing together, and you know, Scott's been able to go a few times when he's not in some other country.
Yeah, so true. So true.
That's pretty much, you know, the start of our outdoor adventures.
Well, and I remember, Dad, too, it seemed like it was a big part of your childhood was these really core friendships that you had back then. And the fact that when we still see these guys today, which we've seen them just recently, just the fact that we're all able to still go fishing together and you're able to maintain those relationships. Do you think that having those kinds of quality, deep relationships with other men in your life, has that really helped you to continue to go and do things in the outdoors?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, we just get each other going.
Yeah.
And because we had a span between when we were all getting married and or off to college and that type of thing, that we kind of backed off going. And it was at my father's funeral that one of the guys, Tony, he came up to my brother and I, and he says, "All right, guys, we messed up. We're going to start going back fishing again." Yeah. And we took the other two dads that were still with us. So we all went, and over time we lost the other two dads. Yeah. But we just kept going, and we're still going.
Yeah, and I mean, I am one of the world's worst fishermen, which I think you can attest to.
Yes.
I think I do more. I think I do more time, spend more time napping than I do fishing. But it's probably one of the few times in my life that I get that moment of real stillness, because at a lot of these lakes that we go to, there's no cell coverage. and I'm not a particularly good fisherman, so it actually gives me a chance to sit in a chair and just enjoy the view. But it's been neat for us recently because Ethan, your grandson and my nephew, he's now up here in Prescott going to Embry-Riddle. So we've been able to just recently continue that tradition by going fishing with him.
Yes, it's great.
Yeah, it is such a joy to do all of that. And some of my earliest memories are in the Sierras. What are some of the places that that you really loved to travel to in the desert Southwest, California, Utah? What were some of your highlights?
Well, in California, obviously the high Sierras, are just the best. I mean, there's just everything there, and the lakes and everything. And then we did down in the flatlands of that area, we did pheasant hunting and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So California had a lot of positives for outdoor stuff for us. And then Utah, my dad's sister had a lodge up there and a cafe. And
in Duck Creek Village, for those of you who've been there.
Yeah. And it was actually also called Movie Ranch Estates, and that's where they filmed a lot of the old Daniel Boone series.
Oh, wow.
And so she had the cafe there they lived on top of it, above the second floor. And then my dad had a lot, and I had a couple of lots that we purchased when they were subdividing areas up there.
Sure.
And then when I was 18, we were invited to go deer hunting in Utah, Parowan area. And the gentleman owned 28,000 acres there, up through the most beautiful areas, all the way up to the big ski area called Bryan Head. And so I just had some amazing times there hunting.
Yeah, I remember even going with you. I was too young to have a rifle myself, but I do remember those experiences in Utah and in the high Sierras. It's actually one lesson that I had in life that I learned the hard way about not cutting towards yourself. But you and I were up in the Sierras. We had packed in on horses and on mules all of our gear, and I was trying to string up a hammock, and I was cutting towards myself through the rope, and the rope broke free from the knife, and the knife came back with all that energy. I was pulling towards it, and it stuck into my chin. Fortunately, it had been an inch and a half lower, it would have gone into my neck. A couple inches higher would have gone into my eye, but it was now stuck firmly into my chin. And I remember, as any kid does, the first thing that you do anytime something goes wrong is you run to your mom or your dad. So I just remember running to you with blood running down so you could pull this knife out of my chin. So those kinds of experiences that we have as kids. Yeah. And you had told me 100 times not to cut towards myself. It's just, as I was one of those kids that had to learn the hard way, as you know. So, your formative years as you were growing up had so much to do with the outdoors. And then you were of the age where, we're coming into the late 60s, and the conflict in Vietnam was really getting going. It had been underway for a little while, and you had a draft number. And why don't you share the story about how you ended up in the Air Force?
Well, I really, at that time, really didn't want to be drafted.
Sure.
Because you didn't have a choice of where you were going to end up or anything.
Yeah.
And so I had gone and enlisted in the Air Force, but I was just on a waiting list. I didn't, and then just waiting to see when I could get in. I got my draft notice date, which was for January the 9th of 1968. And I went to the recruiter and I said, "You've got to do something. It's here's my date and I've got to go in." And I had some good test scores and everything, and some good background, and so he went to the list that was on the wall, that was from the floor to the ceiling, in the recruiting place, and erased my name that was way towards the bottom and put it way up at the top. So I ended up getting the date, and I went in on January the 8th of 68, one day before my draft time.
Wow.
And glad it worked out that way.
Yeah, I remember part of your story was when you were going in, you went past the Marines or something like that, and he said, "Don't screw up, Brady, or you're mine," something like that.
Well, yeah, something like that. But I mean, it was we had to go a few days earlier, to do our check-in in downtown Los Angeles, and so you had to walk up a flight of stairs, and then there was a landing, and then up more stairs. Well, on the landing was this small table with a Marine sergeant sitting there doing your paperwork for your next spot. So I walked up, and he's looking at my paperwork, and he looks up and looks me right in the eye, and he says, "Brady, you better hope that you don't oversleep Monday. Because if you do, you're mine." So my dad was taking me down, and
Nobody slept that night, huh?
Well, we did, but not much. And it was probably 20-minute drive, and we had to be there at 6 in the morning. We left at 2 in the morning. Just in case the car broke down,
sure.
I could have walked there because I wasn't going to miss it.
Yeah, you would have run the rest of the distance for sure.
So
that takes you into the Air Force, and I mean, this is where it's so fun how our own lives paralleled. But I ended up going in the Air Force about 20 years later.
Exact same day.
Yeah, just about the same.
I think it was 25 years, but but the same day.
Yes, exactly.
January the 8th. You went in.
That's right.
And it was...
we went to a little bit of a different boot camp, because during Vietnam they had another one that was open.
Amarillo.
That's right. And I went to San Antonio, but then we ended up going to the same exact tech school base, even though I was a firefighter and you were an aircraft mechanic. So talking about aircraft mechanics, what are some of the things that you learned being an aircraft mechanic that you think has translated into other areas of your life, either how you take care of your vehicles or how you take care of some of your other equipment? I've just always seen you be so thoughtful about making sure that you keep the vehicles maintained and good tires and everything else. Like, what are some of the things that you learned as an aircraft mechanic that you think served you later in life?
Well, kind of what you said there is a big thing. Keeping things maintained. Learning how to do it, learning how to go to the right resources. Back then, we didn't have Google and that type of thing. It was going into books and that type. But those are the big things: using proper tools and maintaining your tools, not just the things you were working on.
Well, and I remember one of the things that you were known for was you developed some tools when you were in the Air Force that they ended up using for years afterwards. Yeah, very cool.
Yeah, it was one particular thing to help on, because I worked on the jet engines, and it was a tool for keeping things from being broken while you're working on it. And I had done schematics and stuff of the thing just about the time I was getting out.
Yeah.
And so they ended up using that and making them to assist while working on the jet engine.
Yeah. And that brought you for your first time overseas. So now you would have been, what, 21 years old at that time? 20?
Well, no, it would have been probably 21.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now you're you've gone through all of your technical training, and they stick you on an airplane for Thailand.
Right.
So talk a little bit about what your experience was, because I can't even imagine how different Thailand would have been in 1969. Is that when you were there?
69.
Yeah, I can't even imagine how different it would be from today. So what were some of the things that you really enjoyed about being in such a different culture?
It was different.
Yeah.
And it was right in the heart of the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
And our base was one of the main support bases for Vietnam. We were so close we were only 8 miles from the Laotian border.
Yeah.
And we had the F-4 Phantom jets. And so they flew out of our base. And then we also had the C-130 gunships that made quite an impact over there.
Literally.
Yeah. And so that's why our base was attacked as much or more than a lot of the bases right in Vietnam.
Oh, because of the tactical advantage of the base. That makes sense.
And the type of planes that we had that they wanted to get to and destroy them.
And as I remember, you had a chance to go in and interact with the locals, and I think you still have some of these things. I think there was a cobra versus a mongoose. You know? Yeah, I mean, you ended up with, I mean, there's a cool chess set that you ended up with as well, but I know that you did spend some time interacting with the locals. What do you feel like you learned about yourself or about the world in Thailand that you weren't expecting?
It truly was different than what I grew up in.
Yeah.
But they were coming along. It was the base that we were at was right by the U-Bahn. Ranchitani was the U-Bahn.
Yeah.
And so we it was starting to get pretty popular and advanced, even though there was everything that was still third world.
Yeah, sure.
And so, the base would try and have stuff set up to be able to do things. And so the Thai base that was right there also, they had a pretty unusual type of golf course.
Okay.
It had very little grass on it, and so when we would pull in the taxi, all these little young Thais would come running up and want to be our caddies. We were they were so fun.
Yeah.
And so anyway, you'd hit the ball, and being that there was little to no grass, where the closest tuft of grass that was there, they'd go and tuft it up and then set your ball on that so that you could hit it again.
Sure.
And the ground was, like you were playing, on a street.
Sure. It was so hard.
Yeah. And then the greens were so hard that they actually had the back of them had built up, like, so the ball would roll. It was almost like a miniature golf, but it was a full-size course.
Amazing.
And then you might be out there ready to hit your drive on the tee, and then all of a sudden, right behind you, there'd be these gunshots, and that's where they had their place that they would do their practice shooting.
Oh, sure.
And then also you'd be there and you'd look, and the Thai army would use you as the enemy. And they'd be down in a crouch walking at you with their M16s pointed at you, just using you for the circumstance. So it was
sounds like very exciting golf.
Oh yeah, it was. You learned that you didn't, to keep your eye on the ball.
Oh, that's great. That's such a fun story. And you were over there for about 14, 16 months, something like that?
13 months.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be 1 year exactly, but I kept telling them, because you could look and see if they had set up a replacement for you, and they weren't. And I kept saying, you got it. Well, we'll take care of it. We'll take care of it. They didn't get around to it. And they had sent me over 8 days before my wife's and my first year wedding anniversary. So that wasn't real fun. Well, because they ended up extending me because they didn't have a replacement. So I came back 10 days after our second year anniversary. Yeah. So I spent our first and second year over there apart. And that was tough.
And that was the only, if I remember, out of 54 years together, if I'm right?
Correct.
That those were the only 2 anniversaries that you ever missed, were those 2.
Oh, yes.
Now, for those that are listening, my dad and mom's relationship was one of the greatest inspirations for me. You guys were together for 54 years. You met as teenagers at a Christian camp up in the mountains of California near Big Bear. And so for me to have such a safe and supportive upbringing was a really powerful lever for me in my life, but just have such respect for the relationship that Mom and you had. So, yeah.
It was the best.
Yeah, she is the best. And, we're coming up on our second year anniversary of losing her. So that's a big one for us as a family. So, but it's looking back, it was such a powerful lesson in honoring your partner, and you guys always did that, and that was a great lesson for me. So thank you for that, Dad and Mom and Mama.
It was easy.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, she was pretty much perfect. So, so let's talk a little bit about the family Jeeps. So this is so great, and I'm going to put this in the production, but you just sent me a picture the other day, and it's the first time I had seen it, but it's my mom holding me. I don't know how old I was, probably around 2. And she's walking away with this great smile, but she's walking away from one of, I believe, the 3 Jeeps that we had as a family. Mm-hmm. And they were all Korean War, CJ, I guess they'd be an M38A1 would be but they were a military Jeep, weren't they?
Yes, that one there was a 52.
Okay.
And it had been used in the Navy.
Okay.
And it was still the gray. It was painted the Navy gray.
Yeah.
And so my dad, I didn't really have any money at all back then. And so my dad ended up, he wanted them too, for us to use for when we go hunting.
Sure.
So he bought it, and he says, but you got to keep it. And so I kept it at the house. And
I remember that.
Used it for taking the boat in and out of the garage. It was great for that.
Yeah.
And then we'd go from there and tow it to Utah and use it there.
I remember some of my earliest memories in Utah were in that Jeep. And there's some great photos of, Mom driving it and you guys going hunting. And I mean, the number of deer that were brought out using that Jeep. So, and then it continued on. Those Jeeps stayed around for a long time, because I remember when Dave, your brother, he would take me out to go fishing, and, we'd be off-road. I mean, some of my earliest off-road memories are in those old Jeeps, and it was incredible where they would go. They wouldn't stop very well. I remember everybody being terrified of trying to stop them, but
especially going downhill.
That's right. Yeah, they were all drum brakes and really small diameter brakes, so they would heat up in a hurry. But I remember you guys had those Jeeps, and then some of my very first memories of cars was that 240Z that you had. And I wrote about this in an article recently, but I remember you fiddling with the choke. I mean, just like as a kid, because I was so small, that you start to piece together these things that are happening around you, and they actually can sometimes become memories. So like I have this very clear memory of you working the clutch on that 240Z to get it started. So that was a really cool car. I remember how much I loved that car.
Well, it was made the same year you were born.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it'd be cool if we could find that one. Or actually, what I'd prefer to do is find those Jeeps. And I know we worked on that for a while, but we never were ever kind of able to pull that off.
Right.
But yeah, so if anybody's listening that has a particular set of skills around finding old vehicles based on a VIN number, we do have the VIN number somewhere. It would be kind of neat to track that old Jeep down. Hopefully it exists somewhere, or hopefully it went on to an exciting life at some point.
Yeah.
At some point. And then continuing on a little bit further, one of my first interactions with camping in a camper, you actually own, what year was that 4-wheel camper that you owned? I mean, you had it on the back of your 1970 Ford, was it?
Yes. Yes.
I mean, it was a 4-wheel camper Granby, and they were made in California, and you probably drove up there and picked it up, didn't you? Or maybe you had it shipped down?
I really don't know.
Yeah.
It would have been local.
Yeah.
I think I got it at one of their distributors.
Sure.
As I remember.
Yeah, but that would have been, probably an early 80s 4-wheel camper. And then so for me, it was just so amazing when we started the magazine, when we started Overland Journal. One of the very first advertisers in the magazine was 4-wheel camper, who it goes back to my very first memories of a camper was that.
Great camper. It was perfect for that truck and pulling the horse trailer. And we used it camping while we were out with the horses mainly.
Yeah.
It was perfect.
And if I remember, you liked it because it was lightweight and because the top popped down, it gave you less, wind resistance probably.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, that was neat. That was such a cool truck too. Yeah. Some good memories around all of that. And I think it's actually the first time I remember, because it was a 2-wheel drive truck, but it had posi traction. And I just remember you going through this huge ditch as we were trying to go someplace hunting, and the tire was spinning, but you kept going. And I'm like, is he going to make it? And sure enough, that old Ford kind of made it through anything you pointed it towards.
Yeah. Especially with the, 4-speed granny low transmission. It took you just about anywhere.
Yeah. And that was pretty common back then. Not everybody had 4-wheel drives. Mm-mm. So you just had a 2-wheel drive with, posi traction and some driving skill. And it was amazing where those guys, you and everybody else, would get those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So cool. Well, one of the other things I wanted to talk to you about was, your 40 plus years of time with horses. And you and I did a trip together. It's probably coming up on 10 years now. I think you hadn't even moved to Prescott yet, but it was close, because we did meet up at the house that you ended up buying.
Yeah.
But
that was
so it was probably
October of 2013.
So close to 10 years ago. And this is a very cool thing, but the Overland Journal offices, purely by coincidence, I had no idea, but it backs up to the highway called 89. And 89, before it was named Highway 89, was actually called the Overland Road. I had no idea. And there is in downtown Prescott, or coming into downtown Prescott by the VA cemetery, you can see the sign, the old sign for the Overland Road. And that Overland Road went from Prescott, from Fort Whipple, which was the original, fort and had most of the inhabitants in that region, and it would go all the way up to Flagstaff, up by Humphreys Peak in northern Arizona. So we figured out a way to tie in riding horses between Flagstaff and Prescott, and then we would interface with a Dodge Power Wagon and some horse trailers and stuff like that along the way. But that was one of the first big trips that you and I did together that included some overland vehicles, and that was really fun. That was a neat one.
Yes,
beautiful.
It was pretty neat. Do we say that we didn't get to finish it?
we didn't. That was my fault. I wore that poor Frisian out in about a day.
Yeah, I wish it was a Frisian. But
Maybe
no,
it was wanting to be a Frisian.
It was a horse that we borrowed for you, and we're told that it was in good condition, and it was a tough ride. And one of the areas that we got out in this marsh really took a lot out of the horses.
Yeah.
And so this horse was really, really tired. And
He was on his last leg.
yeah,
I
and
thought I was going to have to carry that horse out.
Yeah, especially being a borrowed horse, I said we can't wear this thing out.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to go. So I took that horse, and being that I took it, I had to take my horse,
Sure.
which was my own horse. So we had to leave early, and but we saw some amazing scenery.
We
just
did.
in the first part.
And then Jack Quinlan and Kelsey Huber, who, though that wasn't her name at the time, but she's now Dirt Sunrise for those who follow them. But Kelsey worked for us for many years. She was another rider, and then Jack's dad was another rider. But they ended up completing it all the way back into Prescott, which was really cool.
Yeah.
So that was a neat adventure. But the one that really comes to mind for me, and it would have been the same year, was I called you one day at you had a career with State Farm, and I call you at your office, and I said, "Hey, Dad, you want to come to Australia?" And I think you said something like, "I don't know if I've got," and if I remember correctly, and maybe this is just the story that I now tell myself, but I think I said, "Dad, I'm not asking. You're coming to Australia."
It was probably like that.
And you booked your flight, and you already had a passport, and it was the first time you had been out of the country in a really long time. And you flew into Sydney, and then you flew into Alice Springs in the middle of the country. And I was there with Expedition 7, and we had completed our crossing of Australia and the Canning Stock route. And I was on my way back to Melbourne to ship the vehicles out of Melbourne. And I got to pick you up in Alice Springs. And then we spent, about 10 days, I think?
I think it was 8 days.
8 days?
In the outback.
Maybe your whole trip was 10 days or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, you flew in, I picked you up, and we just had the two of us and a 70 Series Land Cruiser and about 1.6 billion flies.
Only during the day.
Yeah, that's true.
They left at night.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, so we got to see Uluru together. We got a great photo of us there, and we got to travel in this right-hand drive. You'd never driven a right-hand drive vehicle, and now you're shifting with your left hand, and you did such a great job. And we did a bunch of off-road driving, some really long overland tracks. So what did you, since this was really your first big overland trip, what did you think of overlanding? Did you enjoy it? What were some of the things that you liked about it?
Australia is a great place to start.
Yeah.
I mean, we had the best time in the outback back then.
Yeah.
And for those that ever watched Quigley Down Under with Tom Selleck, that's where they filmed it, was Alice Springs. They did lots of it. And so a lot of the area just looked like, because I love that movie and had seen it a million times.
Sure.
And then going through the Flinders Forest was really cool.
That was so neat.
With all the kangaroos flying around, and over there the roadkill is kangaroos and emus, and and they were everywhere.
They were.
Yeah.
They were, and we even saw camel out in the middle of nowhere, and we even ate camel.
Yes.
I think we went to the Perinchilla Hotel, and we both got the plate full of I think it had crocodile and kangaroo, and I don't remember what else
it had kangaroo, emu,
yeah,
and the camel sausage.
Yeah, that's right.
And they had little flags in them that let you know which was which. And of course, the emu is just delicious.
It was.
Meat.
It was so good.
And I had it before at one of the Wild West shows that we performed in California. They fed us with those.
Yeah.
And so I had it before, and it's just wonderful stuff. The camel was not the most favorite, but it was more of a sausage-like, and they added some lard to it to help a little bit.
Yep.
But It was a great meal and a great trip. I mean, I just loved it.
Yeah, we had such a good time together, and we traveled in the same way that I traveled during Expedition 7. So we camped out a lot, and we slept in the back of the Land Cruiser, and somehow you were actually able to get some sleep despite my snoring. So, or at least you told me you got some sleep.
Well, I think I was worn out enough.
From the long days.
Yeah.
From the long days. And that drive through the Flinders Range is it's so special. And then I think we were on the Unadada track from there, or in that region, and we just continued on our way down to Melbourne, it's just so beautiful to see that part of Australia.
It was great.
And if I remember, I think you actually, don't you have that Sharps rifle from Quigley Down Under, like similar to the Sharps that Quigley used in one of his movies?
Yes, just a different. That was a special caliber that he had.
Yeah.
I think his was a 5110. I think it was, and mine's a 4570.
Yeah.
And
that's a neat gun.
Oh, they're just fabulous. The old buffalo guns.
That's right. Which is a good segue into, your decades of riding horses, and also, you started off with endurance riding, which talk a little bit about what endurance riding is and the kind of races that you and Mom did.
They have what they call limited distance ones, which are 25 miles. Which is mostly for new people, new horses, and that type of thing. And then you work your way up to the next jump is normally 50-mile races. And then you can go up to 100-mile. And my wife and I did those together we had 2 thoroughbreds at that time that we used. And
that was a bit unconventional to use a thoroughbred, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's mostly Arabs that are used, but the thoroughbreds do really, really well. You just have to take more care of them. They're not into it to where they kind of take care of you.
Yeah.
So you got to protect them a little bit more and not overdo them.
Yeah.
But we just had the best time together doing it. And you had to do a lot of training, which we did where we kept the horses.
Yeah.
So we'd go out together and do a lot of riding together, side by side in about a 7-mile-an-hour trot, because you trot the whole thing.
Yeah.
Posting trot. And it's a great sport.
I just remember you guys coming in either at the finish, or if it was a multiple loops where you'd come in and the vets would be checking the horses and you guys would be getting a little bit of a break. But I don't remember there was ever a time that you guys didn't just come in together. You just rode side by side for the whole thing.
Oh, we did. There was no reason for me to leave her.
Yeah.
And then normally we'd come in to the finish together. And being the gentleman that I am, I always had her pass in front of me and,
of course,
and go across. But
she was an amazing rider herself. So.
Yeah, she did a great job.
Yeah.
Great job.
Well, and that experience brought you then ultimately to a friendship with a gentleman by the name of Phil Spangenberger, who he worked in the media industry around firearms for multiple many decades, but mostly concentrated around Old West firearms.
Black powder stuff, mostly.
Got it. And Phil is a neat guy. Hopefully someday we'll get him on the podcast. But that started to bring up some opportunities for you around movies and television. So talk a little. I mean, I think the one of them that you've done that is so cool is didn't you do something around the something of the dead?
Army of Darkness.
Army of Darkness. That's right.
Yeah, that was actually pretty much my first movie type thing, and we used our own horses in that, and It was great fun.
Yeah. So if you ever watch Army of Darkness, which I think has become a bit of a cult classic, you'll see, Scott's dad goes left, Scott's dad goes right. Well, I think one time you're wearing a skeleton outfit, the next time you're wearing some knight uniform or whatever. But
oh yeah, we were King Arthur's army. We had to dress as King Henry's army. The evil Deadites was the skeletons, and they had a great castle that they built out in Saugus, California, and that's where we filmed. And yeah, it was pretty fun.
Oh, it is fun. I mean, even Paula, our producer, I mentioned one time that my dad was in Army of Darkness, and she's like, "No way!" She's like, "That's so cool." So yeah, pretty fun. And from there, your television and movie involvement continued, and you started to do the Rose Parade. And what's the name of the group that you wrote in for the Rose Parade?
Spirit of the West Riders.
Yeah.
And this year was their, I think, 31st year. I did 22 of them. Mm-hmm. But when I moved here to Arizona, to Prescott, I went once and from here because they convinced me not to quit.
Yeah.
And I went once, and it was so much extra work to get there as early as we had to, because we have to do performances before the Rose Parade. It was just a lot of extra work. Mm-hmm. And after doing 22 of them, it was like,
you got the T-shirt.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it was, I didn't do any more after that.
And Arizona's a pretty nice place to live. I think I remember you telling me on that trip that you crossed over maybe the river or something. You're like, oh, I wouldn't mind just turning around and going home, because you really love.
Oh yeah, when I saw the "Welcome to California" sign, yeah. And it was, I mean, my heart just kind of flipped.
Yeah.
And if I didn't have a commitment, I truly would have turned around there and just come back.
Yeah.
But I had a commitment. And
yeah, sure.
Did it, but since
that was the last one.
Yeah, coming back, I got to see Welcome to Arizona. So.
That's right, exactly. Well, and then beyond that, you were in a bunch of History Channel episodes. Now, what were some of the different History Channel shows that you were on?
I played Virgil Earp in the OK Corral type thing. Also with the Discovery Channel, it was called Shootout at the OK Corral. So we did a different one on that. What they did, which was kind of neat, it was part of their series called Unsolved History. And they took some of the bigger history type things and tried to use today's forensics and that type of thing to to prove or disprove that
some of the stories.
Yeah. So what was thought, and so that was pretty cool how they did it in this for the OK Corral, and they did a great job of coming up with stuff, and they had plot plans from way back at that time to see exactly what the distances were to everything. And then I played Jesse James a couple of times, and a bunch of other ones. I was in a little over 20 of them.
Yeah.
And
then wasn't there was a movie towards the end of that process that you actually had some dialogue and you shoot some people. You were a bad guy, maybe even.
I ended up a bad guy in a lot of them. I was always getting killed or shot, somehow. Vengeance Trail. Vengeance Trail, yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah. It didn't have anything to do with the History Channel or anything. Vengeance Trail.
Yeah.
And that was another fun one.
I bet. Well, and that was the combination of, being a lifetime sportsman and a great shooter, and then decades of time as a horseman. But then you also competed at the highest levels of what was called cowboy mounted shooting.
Right.
And talk a little bit about some of your highlights from that.
Well, I think the sport started in 1993, I believe it was, and what they did is a gentleman that lives here in and he did at the time in Arizona, Jim Rogers. By watching Phil doing his Wild West shows where he did this aerial shooting with blanks to balloons and that, and he thought, "Guy, that'd be a great sport." So they started cowboy mounted shooting. It was between the two of them came up with that, and so I started doing that in I think it was '96, I believe it was, with one of my thoroughbreds, and she was wonderful at it. If I shot as good as she ran, I could have done a lot better, but ended up doing pretty well.
Yeah, I think you were in the top 3 a couple times at the world level.
Well, yeah, the '98 World Championship, had I not had what they call a slip hammer, there's single actions that you have to use, so you have to cock it each time, and you're going 40 miles an hour,
sure,
flying down, with the 5 remaining balloons in a row as fast as you can go, and man, you have to cock so fast.
Yeah.
And the very last one, my finger slipped off the hammer just as I was coming up to the balloon. And so the gun, fired, and I was just off of it. So you get a 5-second penalty,
sure,
when you miss. And so I was reserve for my class. I was reserve world champion.
Yeah, cool.
And I really wanted it for my horse because she had done everything right.
Yeah.
It was me.
Yeah, you've had some incredible horses. You still have 2 horses out there at the ranch. So, and you and I have been on some great rides here in Prescott on the horses. So fun to do that too. So, well, let's talk a little bit about what you've seen. Just watching your kid doing this overlanding thing. What's been your perspective? Certainly not a fly on the wall, because you literally allowed all this to happen by having me to begin with, but to watch your kid drive around the world and do all this crazy stuff, what do you think?
Well, I know that your mother and I have spent a lot of time on our knees praying for some of the places that you ended up going and how you ended up going. The thing that helps us is we know how prepared you always are. I think you'd have had a lot more trouble than you did some of the areas you went if you weren't as prepared. And, that helps us when we know that cuts down on the problems you're going to have by being that prepared.
Yeah. And I remember because I've always had either a spot device or a Garmin InReach running. And I remember you telling me one time, you're like, "Scott, I'm not getting any work done because I keep refreshing the page to see if you." And I think it was because I was going through the walk-on corridor of Afghanistan at that point in time, and you're like, "Please keep moving." You just wanted to see that dot keep moving.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I remember that because you were going right along the border, and I kept in my mind saying, "Okay, make a left turn, make a left turn to get away from that border." And all of a sudden you did. You made a left turn, and I watched, and I thought, "Oh, good." He goes just a ways and then makes a U-turn and goes back to the border and on up the border. And I thought, well, that didn't help any.
Well, you've been involved since the very beginning. You were here when we started the business, at our first opening party, and you were at the parties that when I left on some of the big trips, and you've been able to join me on those adventures. So I'm so grateful for all of your support, Dad, to make this happen. And the support that Mom and you gave me from being a very young child. I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but I think one of the greatest gifts that you gave me growing up was that you guys never told me that I couldn't do something. Now, maybe you were thinking it, like that's a crazy idea or whatever, but I never once heard you guys say, like if I said that day I wanted to be an astronaut, you or mom would just be like, that's such a cool idea or whatever. I don't ever remember, no matter what harebrained thought I came up with of what I wanted to accomplish in my life, I never once heard you guys tell me that I couldn't do it. And I think that that's a real gift to children, is to, if your parents believe in you, even if they don't necessarily know how you're going to get there, but if they tell you that it's possible and that they show some faith in you, it makes a real difference in little kids. So I'm so grateful for Mom and you always being such a champion for me.
We were happy to do it.
Yeah.
We were proud of you. Still are.
Yeah.
And, you give us some great photos.
We have had some great photos. In fact, I think your Christmas card for many years running, that was part of my photography duties of the year, was to be the Christmas card photographer.
You got it.
Yeah. So, and now we're looking at a new generation of our family in Shannon, my sister, your daughter, and her husband Jared, who I adore both of them, and they have two incredible boys, Ethan and Brady, and they have helped me on numerous productions now. So Paula has cut a bunch of videos that the boys have shot, and you can see those on our YouTube channel. And in fact, Ethan's here today helping us sort through some little printing errors that we had with Overland Journal. So we've now got 3 generations in the building today, all a part of this story. But it's been so neat to see the boys have an interest in travel and in overlanding and in cars and all the fun stuff around that.
Absolutely. And they're doing a great job.
They really are.
They just, they couldn't be happier to have the uncle that they have that has the cool stuff to do it with. But what they really like is what they learn.
Yeah.
And they learn so much from you, and get it told to them in the right way, the safe way, and you just do a great job with them, and they just love it.
Yeah, we have such a good time together. Just this morning, I drove into the office, and I brought Ethan with me, and he'd never driven in the snow. He's a good driver, but he grew up in the Phoenix area where it doesn't snow down there. So we took our time, and he had his first opportunity to feel what it feels like when the tire breaks free of traction, or when the brakes start to pulse under ABS, and that was a whole new experience for him. But he did a great job, and we safely arrived at the office. So those kinds of things, for me, it couldn't be more fun, for sure. So when you look back on all of these incredible experiences that you've had, Dad, what's some advice that you would give for people in their life, as they maybe a young person that's listening to that or to this episode, and they're getting ready to travel or to do things with animals like horses, or they're into other sportsmen's activities? What's some advice that you would have for people in their life? What's some of the things that you've learned in this incredible life that you've lived?
I think Nike says the best. Just do it.
Yeah.
Do it while you can. That's the big thing. I mean, I watched my grandparents work so hard. And then at 62, my grandmother passed away, and it just killed my grandfather, and he only lasted just a few more years.
Yeah.
But they had worked so hard up to that point, and they had just retired up to a cabin that they had had for years in Lake Hughes outside of Palmdale in California. And we're just starting to enjoy life, and they passed away.
Yeah.
And they really never got to do the things that they thought. And so I tried in my own life, and then also friends that I knew that I could see which ways they were going and that type of thing. I tried, okay, you got to be prepared for retirement, and that you still have to put everything aside money-wise in that, so that you can be prepared. But the rest, live it.
Yeah.
Because, and even though I talked about it so much, I never thought that I'd be a part of that. And, here I I retired at the end of 2013 and didn't get a lot of years with my beautiful bride to do a lot of even though, and that's the thing, we had done so many things together up to that point, and I was so thankful that we did.
Yeah.
Because you never know when one is going to go, and you don't get to do those things together.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's no fun trying to do them without them.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that was such a lesson for me, Dad, was watching you guys always put each other first, spend a lot of time together, make a lot of memories together. And then just, watching how you treated Mom for decades and the way that you loved her and honored her, even through her illness, you really were incredible in the way that you every day selflessly cared for her. So that's just a reminder of that life is short. People say that all the time, but more often than not, the people that I interview on this podcast that have lived some of their life, or at least a big portion of it, they've all said the same thing. Don't wait to do the things that you want to do, because you don't know if you're going to have the opportunity to do them.
That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, Dad, thank you for being on my podcast. I love you.
Love you too.
It's so great to be able to have this conversation with you for future generations to hear, and also for our audience to be able to enjoy a little bit of the history about how Scotty came to be, thanks to Mom and you. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Any other things you'd like to share with the audience?
I don't believe so. I think you covered a pretty good gamut there.
Yeah, no. Well, Dad, thank you so much for being on the podcast. And we thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.